we were kind of like, okay, we know we're gonna get married, and long distance is really hard and it's really stressful, and we just decided we'd rather just go ahead and get married.
Welcome to the first season of the Pink Fish Podcast. I'm your host, Hailey Hofstetter, and I am so glad that you are here. The Pink Fish Podcast is a Christian living podcast that focuses on casting the light of Christ on women across the world. This very first season of the Pink Fish Podcast is about transitional seasons in life. We will learn about how to lean on the Lord and seek Him as your constant, even when life isn't exactly what you're used to. So, let's swim right in.
Okay, so for those of you listening, Makaley is one of my bestest friends in the whole entire world. And she is super sweet. And for this season, we're talking about like transitional phases of life and change. And so I definitely wanted to bring Makaley on. Like, she was one of the first people I thought about because she has experienced an extreme amount of change over the past year and like just different seasons that she's been in. And so, yeah, I just wanted to talk about that a little bit today. But before we get started, I kind of wanted to talk about how Makaley and I got to be friends because I think that's like a really sweet story that people can just learn from in like the boldness that you reached out to me in. So we kind of knew each other beforehand because Makaley had been on a mission team with a group of my friends that I was close with, but I had not been there at the time because I was studying abroad. And so I kind of felt like I already knew you, but like we were in this phase of like we know who each other is, but we don't really like know each other, you know? And so kind of like what was your thought process during that time?
So at first I didn't know you existed because you were studying abroad, having a good time. But then when you came back, it was weird because I had kind of become friends with a lot of your friend group, but you hadn't been there. And so then I definitely was hearing about you, and then we would interact, but it was more like we were friends through friends than friends ourselves, if that makes sense. But I definitely thought you were very bubbly and outgoing, and like just saw you as having like everything put together because you had all these great friends and like a good relationship with your boyfriend who's now your husband. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I just like I admired how mission minded you were because like even now I see it in every aspect of your life, and so I really liked that. And so I think I just viewed you as someone who had a lot of the characteristics that I wanted for myself, which is funny.
Oh,
Yeah, and now it's funny looking at it too, just because now that we are closer, we've been able to relate on a lot of levels that then I probably never would have guessed. I would have been like, oh, Hailey doesn't have my little problems.
yeah. Oh, that's so sweet, and, like, just how, like, you can see someone and admire who they are and, like, the things that they're doing, but, like, not realize that, oh, they're struggling with the same things. And I think one thing I really appreciate about our friendship is and hopefully you feel the same way, because if not, this is gonna be awkward. But I was at a worship night the other night, and one of the girls I met there, we were just, like, talking about friendship. She said that, like, a lot of times with friendships you feel like I don't know, like, maybe, like, there's someone that's kind of, like, mentoring you, or there's a friend that you're mentoring, and it's rare to find friendships where, like, you feel equally yoked, you know, and where, like, you're both pouring into one another equally, and that's definitely the kind of friendship, like, I wanna be seeking more, but I definitely feel like I don't know, like, we have that unless I don't know. Would you
I
feel
would agree. I every time I talk to you, I feel like you're able to help me and build me up, and I hope that I'm able to do the same thing for you.
Yes, I'm just so encouraged every time I speak to you and the wisdom that you share with me and just I don't know, like, the experiences that you've been through that really, like, help me, like, right where I am and right where I'm at, so it's just so
I
sweet.
really value our
Yeah.
friendship. It's so good.
Hey, so, Michaela, you were talking about how you just kinda, like you saw who I was, and you noticed things about me that you wanted in friendship, and so I think that the, like, next step you took was really sweet, so could you share that with everyone and just kinda, like, how you saw someone you wanted to be friends with, and then you took that step to make it happen?
Yeah. So I always felt super awkward doing this because I don't know, maybe it's because people didn't do it to me, and so I just felt like it was a really weird way of going about things, but also I'm awkward sometimes, so I didn't know a better way to do it. But yeah, I saw you, I saw your characteristics, and I also saw, you were friends with people who I really enjoyed being friends with. And so I just was like, hey, I would like to be your friend and we should get coffee sometime.
Yeah. And I just loved that, and I think there's so much to learn from that because you were just so forward in that situation. You're like, "Hey, like, I think that we would be good friends, so do you wanna get coffee?" And I just remember being so like, "Oh, wow, like, I've really been wanting to be friends with her too," like, all the things I just noticed about you and how you were also, like, just the way everyone spoke about you and how great you were, like, I had been wanting to be friends with you too, but, like, I just really appreciated you taking that step, and I think that's something, like I said, that people can definitely learn from and that I definitely learned from, and it's worked out so great because here we are.
It's been good because I definitely like looking at you. Not that you're like a scary person, but I did kind of feel intimidated approaching you because I'm like, she's so cool. I don't know if she'll even want to be friends with me, but I'm glad I didn't let the intimidation stop me because you're the sweetest person, and I'm so glad we're
Oh,
friends now.
oh. I feel like this podcast, I wanted to bring you on and, like, encourage you and, like, give you a space to share your story and, like, tell everyone how awesome you are, and I feel like you've just been, like, pointing it back to me and making me feel really encouraged, so thank you, Michaeli, for that.
You make it easy.
Okay, so now I actually haven't really talked to you in person since your biggest life update, and so I kinda wanted to hear about this whole, news that you're about to break to this audience.
Yes. So my husband and I are expecting a baby, a little girl.
Aw.
She's due in May, so we're very excited. We're naming her Genesis. I'm not sure if I've even
Oh,
told you that, Haley.
no, you haven't, that's so sweet.
Yeah, so we're calling her Jenny for short, and it's been really nice to be able to
Oh,
put a name with her. So now we're able to talk about her with a name, and she's not just the baby. So
yeah,
it's very exciting. Also, slightly overwhelming.
yeah.
Figuring out how to take care of a kid will be an interesting change. We just had another ultrasound this past week and got to see her, and every time I see her, I just get more excited to meet her. And
Oh.
I feel like that's all I talk about anymore. But
Oh, that's so sweet. Well, I just know that you're gonna be such a good mom, and I'm just, like, excited to, like, see you through this season and, like, the changes that you'll go through and, like, the ways that you'll grow, and yeah, it's gonna be so good.
thank you.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that there's just there'll be a lot of change because we're moving a month after she's born, and so I'm just
Mm,
hoping that I'm able to enjoy the little things and not stress too much about all the things I'm probably gonna mess up.
yes, yeah. Well, I mean, you definitely are gonna make mistakes, but, like, I know that, like, you'll handle those with grace, and, like, those are really good learning opportunities too. And I just think Genesis is such a cute name, like, what was kinda, like, the thought process in choosing that name?
So it was actually Andrew. He, for a long time, has been thinking that if he has a daughter first, he wants to name her Genesis because she's the beginning. And so then we talked about it, but I was completely convinced we were having a boy. And we had a boy name picked out. And going into the like anatomy scan where we would find out, I just knew it was a boy, and we had his name picked out, and it was all good. And then it was not a boy. And so then when we got back out to the car, I was like, well, now we're not going to have this boy name, I guess. So then we we decided to go with Genesis, and I I like I love the name. I think it's adorable. Andrew's very excited, and he thinks it's hilarious that he's been talking about having a Genesis for so long, and now it's actually happening. And I also really like the nickname Jenny because my mom's name is Jennifer, and so her nickname was Jenny, and so
Yeah.
it's kind of a cool little hint at my mom as well.
Oh, that's like triple gazillion quadruple sweet. I love that. Okay, so now on to the topic that we actually got together to talk about today. Um, it's just been so sweet to catch up with you and go over all the things and get to share like our friendship with all the people listening. But I'm really excited for you to speak into everyone about your experiences with change and transition and like being content during those different seasons. And so to start off, could you maybe tell us a little bit about like what your transition was like after college? So we met in college at Freed Hardeman, and that's where we first met, where you asked me to get coffee with you and we became besties. But from that time until now, kind of like what are the different seasons of transition that you've been going through?
So I was at college and I got engaged while I was in college and decided to go ahead and move back home with my parents so that I could just work and try to save up money before then getting married and moving back to Tennessee. And so I left college and went home, and I got a job as sort of a caretaker for an older couple, and that was a really good experience. My dad had mentioned trying to find a job that would look good on my resume, and I'm not sure how good this job will look on my resume, but it ended up being so good because that sweet couple was able to give me so much wisdom, and they became really some of my closest friends. I spent 5 days of the week with them, and so they were just some of my closest friends during that time. And so I was home for about 6 months, and in that time, I was also planning my wedding. And so then I got married and moved back to Tennessee, where my husband is in preaching school. And so we've been here, and we will have lived here for right at about a year before we move again, wherever my husband gets a preaching job. And a month before we move, we'll be having a baby.
That's a lot of different things.
Yes.
That's really all the things. So I wanted to like backstep a little bit and ask you about you left college to kind of like prepare for marriage, save money, all the things. I wanted to ask you about like what helped you to make that decision, and like how did other people in your life respond to that decision that you made?
When Andrew and I first got together, we had been talking about and like had decided that our relationship was going to lead to marriage.
Mhm.
We were talking about waiting until after I graduated from college because there's a third year program here at the preaching school. He thought about staying, so we would both be graduating the same time. And so
Mhm.
we thought about doing that, and just we were long distance, and it's it's hard.
Yes.
So then we were kind of like, okay, we know we're going to get married, and long distance is really hard and it's really stressful, and I we just decided we'd rather just go ahead and get married, even though that would change plans. And so I talked we talked about trying to just like for me to commute to school every day,
Mm.
and so that I could still be at Freed, but we could still be married. And we talked about a few options, but all of them sounded stressful and led to us getting married, but then not actually having like a lot of quality time together because we'd both be running around like crazy.
Yeah. Which for people listening is like how far from Memphis? Like an hour and a half?
Hour and a half,
Mhm.
yeah. So it would have been 3 hours of driving every day on
Yeah.
top of homework and everything.
Mm.
So it just would have been a lot. And so we decided it would be better to just go ahead and get married. And also I was going to Freed for Bible, and while I was learning a lot, I don't need the degree in order to do mission work. And
Mhm.
so I was spending a lot of money and time on a degree that was really beneficial, but not necessary. So
Mhm.
that helped my decision making as well. And then financially, I don't know if you ever took a a Dave Ramsey class.
Yes, I definitely have.
Okay. So I took one of those probably in middle school.
Mhm.
They had our whole youth group go through it at church, and I just remember thinking that I could never go into debt because it's just this big hole that I'm gonna dig myself deep into and never be able to climb out of it. And so I totally freaked myself out about debt. And so I told myself I would never get a credit card and I would never take out loans and I would never do all these things. And so I was paying cash for college, which is great, but I was running out of money very fast. And
Yeah.
so leaving helped me not go into debt because I didn't want to do the whole student loan thing. I know a lot of people do it and they handle it wisely and it's okay, but I didn't even want to try. And
Yeah,
so
Dave Ramsey scared that right out of you.
yeah. So financially I decided I didn't want to go into my marriage bringing in a bunch of debt. And so um me leaving school, I wasn't going to be having to take out student loans, and then I'd also be able to be saving up money for whenever we got married.
Mhm.
And so those were kind of some of the bigger factors. And I did, when I talked to my parents about it at first, they weren't super happy just
Mhm.
because they didn't want me to be throwing all my plans away for a guy, you know? And that's how
Yeah.
a lot of my friends reacted too. And and I can understand, especially from their perspective, they are seeing that Andrew's life didn't necessarily have to change a lot, but mine was going to have to change drastically. And
Mhm.
so I can see where their concern was coming from, but I kind of just had to set my feelings aside and look at it um, from a different advantage of like, okay, what's going to be the best for me, financially and like for the stress of not having to do long distance anymore. And there's this guy that I know I'm going to marry, and it just felt like everything was better if we just went ahead and did it.
Mhm.
And so I just had to sit down and explain that to people who are concerned about it. And people did express their concerns, but I didn't have anyone that was like, "Oh, you should not do this. This is, I'm not going to support you in this." Everyone was still very supportive, and I I really appreciated that, especially for my friends at Freed. Some of my friends, I think, struggled seeing that it was a good option, even though it looked different.
Mhm.
And so, for those who were, because most of my friends are still at Freed and they're finishing their degree, and so for me to leave seemed really weird to them, but they were still very supportive, and I appreciated that. And then they also were, I guess, empathetic to the fact that I was going back home to where I didn't have that support group. And
Mm.
all of y'all did a very good job of still reaching out to me, even though I'd put myself in the situation.
That's so sweet, and I think that says a lot about you that, like, you took counsel from other people and, like, you heard what they had to say, but you yourself, you were like, "This is the decision, like, this is what I feel led to do, like, this is just what makes sense for me," and I'm glad that people were able to listen to you during that time and accept the decisions that you had made. So,
Yeah, I'm definitely very grateful for the people I had in my life at that time.
what were some of the things that you struggled with when you decided to move back home?
So, one of the big things was leaving my friends. I was really close to my roommate, and we would spend every day together. We ate most meals together. We had a lot of things we enjoyed doing together. And so I was really sad to be leaving all of that. And then my friend group, I didn't necessarily spend every day with, but we did a lot of things together. And it was nice just to have someone that I could call who I knew was going to be there for me, and I was able to be there for them, and we could just, having that like spiritual conversation with people my age on a daily basis was really nice.
Mhm.
And I didn't necessarily have that back home. And so having to leave the good support system that I had to going back home where I had my family and I had some friends, but it wasn't the same.
Mhm.
That was definitely a struggle and something that I really worried about. And I worried about how it was going to change all of my relationships. That was probably one of the biggest things. And then also, was not, I loved where I grew up, but I wasn't planning on moving back there,
Mhm.
and for like various reasons. And so I kind of felt like I was taking a step backwards. Like I had finally moved out and, or half moved out for college, but I had left and I was somewhere that I really liked. And I was going to keep going from there. And then I felt like I was taking a step back because I was moving back in with my parents, back to the place that I didn't want to be. And so that was hard too.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up both of those things because I think that's what a lot of people experience after graduating college. And I know you made the decision to leave college early rather than graduating, but anyone who is going from this phase of like being in college and being around friends all the time and like especially at a Christian school, like having a good Christian support system, and then you go somewhere else where you don't know as many people and you don't have that community that you once had, like that's just a really difficult transition and something that Xavier and I definitely struggled with when we first moved to Nashville. And so I'm glad that you brought that up. And then also feeling like you were taking a step back, that's something that a lot of people have to do as well when they're first leaving university is just, you have to like take some time to get ready before you can really go on to the next step some of the times. And some people they get their dream job right out of college and they go move to the place that they want to go and but for a lot of people that just not the case. And so thanks for being like so honest about that and just saying like that is the decision that you made, but it wasn't exactly the perfect situation for you, but it's the one that you made for a time so that you could be better prepared for a next season that you're about to go into. Talking more about the not having the same kind of community back home that you had at school, what were some things that you did to combat that? And were you ever able to make a community or like how did you deal with that?
So I I definitely I don't want to downplay my family or anything. I am close to my family. My parents and siblings are Christians and we have a pretty good relationship, and so I had them,
Mhm,
but I didn't have as many people my age as I did back at college. And so I had um, my my best friend, who's now my sister-in-law as well. Um, she was back home, and then I we hadn't talked as much while I was at school, but it's one of those friendships where we can just pick up back where we left off,
mhm,
and I'm really grateful for that. And we were able to spend more time together. And then I had my husband. His family lives like 15 minutes from my parents' house, and so I was able to spend more time with his family and his siblings, and kind of just take advantage of the time to really get to know them a little bit better. I've known them for a long time, but I haven't always viewed them as okay, they're going to be my in laws in my new family. So going back home with that knowledge, I was able to spend more time with them. And then I did have one friend in particular who's my age, and we're kind of in similar life phases, but she's not a Christian. And so I was able to kind of put more time into that relationship. And we would talk on the phone and stuff, but it's a lot different when you're able to meet in person.
mhm,
And she's someone, like, if I had to think of one person, I guess, she's the one I would think of who I've really been trying to pour into spiritually because I love her so much and I want her to become a Christian.
mhm,
And so I I was really grateful for the time that I was able to have to spend with her. So that was kind of my community. And then I did have my church family, and then I had the couple who I was working for. And so on a daily basis, I was mostly spending time with the couple I worked for and my family. And I would say those were probably that was my most important community while I was home.
Mhm.
And it's funny how my community looked at college versus how it looked back home, because my college friends were all my age, and then I go home and my best friends are in their 80s, and I'm I'm taking care of them while one of them has a broken hip, and I'm taking them to all the doctor's appointments. And um, I something my dad told me while I was looking for a job was the resume thing, like try to make the most of the situation. But I kind of I took it advice, but I think it applied more than just to a job situation. And so while this older couple wasn't necessarily who I would have picked to be my best friends at that time, it ended up being so good. They have so many amazing life experiences that they were able to share with me, and then all of the wisdom that just comes with life experience. And then also they actually grew up in the town where I grew up, and then they got married and moved and traveled the world and lived all across the country. And then this is where they've chosen to come back to retire. And that was kind of a funny, like, full circle for me, is that I'm at the stage where I grew up here and now I'm ready to go off and, experience and travel and live different places. And they've already done all of that and now have come back. And um, I'm really glad that I was able to set aside my feelings about, I could have just been like, I don't have any friends here and
Mhm.
everything is awful. And maybe I felt like that some days, but I'm really glad that I didn't let that stop me from pouring myself into the people who I did have and
Mhm.
allowing them to pour themselves right back, because that that time was just it just felt awkward because I moved back home just to turn around and move again. I didn't even unpack all of my things,
Mhm.
but it was such a good learning experience. And as far as community goes, it also was a good reminder that I don't need, 50 people who are right there who I can go get lunch or coffee with, as long
Mhm.
as I have a few people right there. And then it's okay to have like long distance best friends, because they still count as your community,
Mhm.
and you're still able to have those relationships, and they're still able to give you what you need, and you're able to give them some right back, even though you're not in person, if that makes sense.
Makaley, you just said so many good things that I just wanted to like pull out and like expand on them a little bit more. And so I love how you were talking about like the friends that you had in the community that you had when you went back home were really different from the community that you had at Freed. And you definitely like had to make some adjustments in your expectations, it seems like. And I feel like I definitely had to do the same thing when I first moved to Nashville, because like when you're at free at a Christian university, you have, like you said, like 50 or more people that you can just be like, hey, let's go get coffee. Hey, let's do this. And at Freed, it's like you need to almost like protect your energy and be like, okay, who am I going to like choose to pour into? Like you have like all these choices to make about like what friends am I going to spend time with? And then when you went back home, you didn't necessarily like have that choice to the same extent anymore. Like it was like these are the people who are in my life and I want to make the most out of what they have to offer me in relationships and what I have to offer them, and we can just pour into one another and really make the most of what is there. And like the Lord can definitely surprise you in what he can teach you through people who you just happen to have a relationship with that maybe you didn't even choose to have a relationship with, but like you can still gain from those experiences as well. So I just love that, and I think that's something that we had to learn coming to Nashville as well. because for the first little bit, some of our best friends here were our landlords, and they're like they have full-grown children in their 20s, and so it we just gained so much from those relationships of how much they were able to pour into us, and then just little things that we were able to help them with too. So, thanks for sharing about that, and I think that's just something good for those of you listening who are in a similar season, like, just instead of thinking about like, "Oh, like, I don't have any friends here," like, focus on the people who are in your life and who you do have there, and start to think about, "How can I make the most of these relationships and use these relationships for the Lord that are already right here in front of me?" So I just love that. And then I also wanted to ask you, you talked about a little bit about how long distance friends are also part of your community. And so I'd love for you to give us some advice of how to stay in touch with long distance friends and to have intimate relationships still and feel like you're still best friends, but not be able to go get coffee with each other anymore, see each other in person as much.
Yeah, so I definitely feel like there are better people to get advice for this topic from because I like looking at myself, I feel like I'm really bad at reaching out to people. I think about my friends like, on a daily basis, and I'll think of something and think, oh, Hailey would find this really funny, or this reminds me of Hailey, but then I don't reach out in that instance, and so I kind of have to remind myself sometimes that while I do have a lot of friendships that I can pick up where I left off, I also don't need to leave them sitting for, years because then eventually it will fade and be different as you grow and change as people. And so for my friends who are back at college, they were going through they were all friends. And so they were going through things together and their friendships were still growing and still moving. And for a little bit, I kind of did let that stop me because I felt like I had taken myself out of the equation and I wasn't really their friend anymore, which wasn't the case. And I didn't, my friendships are going to look different than other people's, and that's okay because I'm a different person. And so I kind of had to remind myself that and then, text them and ask, how are you doing? And a lot of my friends were so good about texting me back or just randomly calling me. And so um, I I'm still having to learn how to handle the long distance friendships, but I definitely would say that just texting whenever you think of the person or texting when you see something that reminds you of them is a good way to just get a conversation started. And also, I have to remind myself that not every conversation has to be a let me give you a recap of the last month that I haven't talked to you. Sometimes it can just be, oh, I saw this and I thought it was funny, and we talk about that for a little bit, and then that's the end of the conversation. And that's fine. Like, I don't have to tell them every detail of my life every time I talk to them.
Yeah. Oh, that's so sweet. You said that you're not good at this, but that was such good advice right there. And as someone who was long distance friends with you for a period, like, I would have never thought like, "Oh, Makaley is not good at this." Like, I felt so loved by you, and like our friendship grew and like made progress even when we were not together in person, because a few of the things that you did with me that I really appreciated is one time we had like a coffee date where like you went to a coffee shop and, like, I made coffee at my house, and well, I actually had tea because I don't drink coffee, so disclaimer there. But and we just, like, FaceTimed and had a little Spanish FaceTime date, which was, like, such a fun thing that we got to do, and, like, I feel like that strengthened our relationship, and once again, like you were saying, like, in that time, like, we were practicing our Spanish, and, like, we were just, like, glad that we were having that, like, virtual coffee date, but neither of us were like, "Hey, this is the, like, 47 billion things I've been doing in the past, like, 5 weeks since we've talked last time." Like, we were able to just be like, "This is the here and now, and, like, what we wanna connect about is fine." And so, yeah, like, I'd never thought about that, but it's definitely something I appreciate in a friendship when you can just start hanging out and you don't have to have all the, like, small talk, like, preview questions like, "Oh, how are you doing?" or "How's work going?" or, like, you can just talk about what you're there to do. So, I love that.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah, my Spanish vocab is not good enough to fill you in on everything that's been going on, so
That's funny. Oh, another thing that we did that I really appreciated is we actually got to do ministry together for a little bit, long distance. And so, I guess, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about that and your role in the ministry we were doing?
yeah, so you and Maddie started the jail ministry, and so some of the ladies you had it had been several months, right? You had been studying with them,
Mm.
and then they got out of jail, and they were in Memphis, where I was about to be moving to, and so y'all kind of reached out. I had offered to help in any way I could, whether that be like writing cards or anything. I think, but then y'all had reached out and said, "Hey, they're moving to where you're about to be living, and we have been talking and thinking maybe it would be nice to kind of, I guess, set y'all up
Yeah.
so that you can get to know them and then start studying with them and pouring into them, and hopefully it'll grow from there."
So, like you said, Makaley, for our listeners who don't know, I got to I got to start a jail ministry when I was going to school at Freed Hardeman in the local jail. And one of the big things that me and my co-founder of the jail ministry really emphasized was when the ladies got out of the jail, we wanted to stay in contact with them, and not only stay in contact with them, but also connect them with Christians who were going to locally be living in the same area. And so we contacted Makaley and we started doing like these FaceTime Bible studies together, and we would just pray for one another and catch up. And it was just some of the sweetest times, and we had some of the sweetest conversations through that. And like just doing the Lord's work together was really strengthening too. So,
Yeah, that was definitely when we'd meet up like once a week. That was definitely very encouraging for me, especially since I had left Freed and I didn't have that community of spiritually minded, same aged people. That was really nice having Bible study once a week with you guys.
oh, I'm so glad. And it was definitely really refreshing for me, like still being in that environment where there's so many people and the community is just like you're having to make choices of where to spend your time rather than, seeking community. Even during that time when I was overfilled with relationships in such a blessed way, like that time was just really valuable for me to have a little FaceTime study with someone who isn't in that environment and just be at a slower pace and connect with someone who's not on campus and who isn't involved in all the same things that I am. And you really just were able to like speak truth into me over some of the things I was going through at that time. I feel like because you were somewhere else and you weren't exactly where I was. So maybe that's another value of long distance friends is they are not necessarily in all of the same situations as you, so they have a fresh perspective that you might not be able to have. Another thing that I really liked that you previously said, Makaley, was you were talking about how your friendships look different now than they did when you were at Freed. And so that got me to thinking about just comparison and all the different ways that comparison can kind of attack us in seasons of transition. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit about how comparison affected you when you were going through all of these different changes.
Yeah, so I definitely have struggled with this for years and years of comparing myself to the people that I'm around because I I love the idea of being an independent person and just unique and totally just me. But then I look at other people and I'm like, oh, they do that so well, or that looks so good, and then I want to be like that. And so when I was at college, we were all in similar phases of life. We were going through the same thing. We had similar goals, even if it's just to graduate. And so I really liked that feeling of fitting in, I guess. And then I left, and my friends, some of my friends were graduating around the time that I left, and then some of my friends were going to be there for a couple more years. But it was hard to leave them whenever I had finally found that community where I was fitting in well. And then going back home, to a situation where that wasn't my long term destination goal. Like, I didn't want to stay there. So it felt silly to even go back. And then no one else was leaving. And I definitely did compare myself a lot, especially because I had the semester I ended up not going back for, I had originally planned on studying abroad for, and several of our friends actually ended up going that semester. And it looked like such a fun group. It looked so good. And then y'all who had gone before had made really good friends, and you had all these really cool experiences. And so I was like, I want to do that. And then I wasn't even planning on going with those people, I guess, but then a lot of my other friends were also going that same semester. And so it was going to be super fun. And it was going to continue that life experiences with my friends. And then I decided not to do that. And then I ended up just going back home. And so then on social media and everything, I would see people posting, like, oh, I'm in Germany today, or I'm, in Croatia. And I was so happy for them. But it was also like they were, I was comparing myself to them because I was in small town Oklahoma. I was spending every day with like an older couple, just like running their errands and doing their grocery shopping and their laundry. And my life compared to my friends' lives just didn't seem exciting. And so I felt myself a lot of times thinking about, oh, that could have been me. Like I could have been traveling around Europe having these cool pictures to post on Instagram or whatever, but instead I'm just back home doing laundry. And it was definitely, I struggled a lot with comparing myself. And it wasn't even like I felt cheated out of the like opportunity or anything. Like, I chose not to go, and I'm happy I chose not to go. But I think I worried so much about how other people would view me, or if they would like pity me because I was just sitting back in Oklahoma while they were doing all those cool things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
I definitely struggled with comparison in that aspect, and just I had to remind myself that I made the decisions I made for a reason. And even though it looked different than what my friends were doing, I I was still being fulfilled, and I was still doing something important, and I was enjoying myself. So I didn't need to compare my experiences to theirs just because they didn't look as cool or as exciting.
Yeah, I guess I didn't even ever think about that for you, about how that group had gone abroad, and it was so many of our close friends. And yeah, I definitely can kind of like feel how that would be, just seeing all these posts and what everyone is doing. And like you said, you were enjoying what you were doing. You were enjoying the phase of life that you were in and the things that you got to do. But for some reason, the way our minds work, like, we just see someone doing something else and it like instantly just can rob us of that joy and be like, oh, am I actually doing the right thing? Yeah. So thank you for sharing about that. And I know that that is going to be really beneficial for people listening. Like, because I think you talking through that just made me realize, like, oh, we just need to focus on like what we are doing in this moment and recognize, like, oh, I am enjoying this phase of life and I don't have to worry about the what if I would have done this or what if I would have done that, because that can get really exhausting really fast.
Yeah, I feel like it steals so much joy, and I had to remind myself like I just need to be content where I am because I like where I am right now, and there's a reason I'm here, and I don't need to, like, I can be happy for my friends without being
Mhm.
jealous of what they're
Yeah.
doing.
And just speaking on the other side, when I studied abroad, there like I was looking at what people were doing at Freed and I was like, "Oh man, like did I make the right choice to study abroad? Like I'm missing opportunities at Freed." And I'm traveling around Europe and that's what I'm thinking. And then also there were many times where I was going from place to place and I was like, I just wish that I could be in a small little town and not doing very much and not going from place to place. And so, yeah, the grass is always greener on the other side, no matter where you're at. So, okay, so we've talked a lot about how you were affected socially throughout this time of transition. Now I kind of want to switch the conversation to how you were affected spiritually. Um, so can you tell us a little bit about how your relationship with the Lord shifted, or how things look different from one season to the next?
I don't know if you listen to acapella, but they have a song that's talking about coming down from the mountain because you feel so good when you're on top, but you have to come down to the people below and minister to them too. And I feel like at Freed, I really felt like I was on top of the mountain. I was surrounded by my Christian friends who were my age, going through similar things. I felt very encouraged. We had chapel every weekday morning, and I enjoyed that, and everything was very spiritually focused for me. And so I felt very on top of the mountain, and it wasn't hard to remember to pull out my Bible to read or to pray and spend time with God, because all my friends were doing that too, and then the school was also encouraging us to do it. And so I felt very like on top of the mountain. And then going back home, I felt like I was leaving this like spiritual oasis to some extent, and I think it was good for me, but I it definitely took some adjusting, because I had to remind myself that even though I wasn't around these friends who were encouraging me to, grow closer and have those like spiritual conversations every day, I still needed to be growing closer to God, because, at the end of the day, my friends don't go with me, but God always goes with me, and that relationship is the most important relationship. And it was really easy for me to make time, just like with work and with my family. I did not have a problem being like, okay, but I need like an hour tonight so I can call Andrew, because I haven't talked to Andrew at all today and I really want to call him. And I would do that all the time, and I didn't have a problem with that. But then I was not so good at setting aside an hour to just read my Bible or to pray. And I felt like I had to kind of remind myself that that was important too, even though I wasn't constantly being reminded by the people I was around. And so I think it was good for me to kind of take responsibility and also examine why I had found it easier. And it was because the people around me were doing it, but my people aren't always going to be doing that around me, especially going into mission work. Like, might be alone a lot, but it's still God. The relationship with God is what is important and what needs to be prioritized. And so it was a good way of practicing prioritizing that time with God, even even though I wasn't constantly being reminded to do that by my friends or school or whatever. And so that took like a lot of self-examination and self-control, I guess. Um, but it was also good because I guess, there's your friends where you're equally yoked, like you were talking about. And then there's those who you can sort of mentor, and then those who mentor for you. And so I had my one friend who I studied with, and we had a lot of spiritual conversations while I was back home. And unfortunately, she still hasn't obeyed the gospel, and so we're still having those conversations. But she was the one who I was able to kind of pour into and sort of mentor. And then the one of the things I learned, and I have to remind myself, is I would worry about whenever I like graduated college and then I moved somewhere, like y'all moved to Nashville, about not having friends my own age. And I still think about that sometimes with Andrew, is I worry about wherever we move to, there might not be a lot of young people, and so we're not going to have friends our age. But then I just remember this time when I was back home, and the the older ladies at church, they became like, I looked forward to talking to them every week, and they had so much wisdom and advice, and especially when you tell people that you're getting married, they get so excited and they have so much to share, and I appreciated all of it. And that was kind of they were able to mentor me through that season of my life, and that helped me so much spiritually because I was still having to grow, and you have to fill your cup before you can fill other people's cup. And so I was having to study and grow in order to be able to study with this friend who's not a Christian. But then these older ladies were over here and they were filling me up too, and they were pouring into me, and they were giving me so much advice and so many reminders about, okay, going into a Christian marriage, these are the things you need to remember, and these are the ways that you can prepare yourself now so that when you go into it and like set good habits now, because life's not gonna like magically fall into place once you get married. And so like I was able to mentor and people were mentoring me. And then um like one of the things I really enjoyed while I was back home is my mother-in-law teaches the ladies class on Wednesday nights, and she was gone for a week, and so I was asked to teach. And she was teaching Bible geography, which I really enjoyed her class, but geography is not my strong suit, and I was like, can I just teach on something else? Because I don't even know where to go in that. So, um, so I'm passionate about evangelism, and I've become especially more passionate about personal evangelism and just like evangelizing where you are. And so I was able to talk to these ladies about that, and I was able to share what I'm passionate about and talk about a need that I saw back home that wasn't necessarily being filled. And they were so encouraging because I was like 19 or 20 going into this, and it's a bunch of ladies who have all this life experience, and they're so much older than me. They have grown kids, like they know what they're doing. But I'm this little girl coming in and being like, y'all need to do this. Of course, I didn't phrase it like that, and I didn't even think about it like that. But I was afraid it was going to be perceived like that, I guess. Um, but they did not take it like that. They were super encouraging, and it made me feel like we did have like a companionship, and I didn't need to view it so much as I don't know what I'm talking about because I'm young, so just sit down and be quiet. And they were very encouraging to me. And then I was glad we had such good conversation during that class. And it was just a good reminder that even though age does affect a lot in life, I'm still able to relate spiritually to the people I'm around who are all different ages. And so I think this time back home helped me step back and see, okay, here are all the different opportunities I'm having spiritually. And so, like, in the moment, I kind of just did what I could. But now it's easy looking back and seeing all the different opportunities I had spiritually. And I'm really glad I was able to take advantage of so many of them because I felt like I was coming down from the mountain, but it, I really wasn't, going into the deep, dark depths of loneliness or anything. Like, I still had people around me. And so God still took care of me spiritually and gave me what I needed. I just needed to, open my eyes and be open to accepting it.
Oh, I love that, Makaley. That is so sweet. Thank you so much for just sharing about your spiritual journey. And I love that analogy of the song that you're talking about and being on top of the mountain and then having to go into the depths. And that's just so precious and so sweet. Um, to kind of wrap things up before we get off here, I wanted to give you a chance to just speak into the listeners of this podcast and just state any like final pieces of advice that you have for those who are in seasons of transition and who are going through a lot of change and are in unfamiliar situations.
I've referenced it a few times, but my dad told me to take advantage of the opportunity and to use the time that I had so that looking back on it, I can be like, wow, I'm glad I did that. Or, I really benefited from this time. And I think that really applies to transitional periods because it's so easy to just wish your life away because I I was, engaged and I was moving back home, but I knew I was just going to turn around and move again and I was going to get married and I was so excited, but I had like 6 months of my life and I I'm sure I probably to some extent did just sit there and wish, okay, I wish this time could just pass faster because I definitely was feeling like that. But also, there was so much good that went on during that time that if I had just spent the whole time looking forward, I would have missed everything happening in the present. And I know that's something I did a lot in high school. I was just so excited to graduate that missed so many opportunities. I missed out on a lot of quality time with my family just because I was just so ready to be gone that I didn't enjoy the time that I had with them. And that's something that I would look back on wishing I had done differently. And so going into this transition, having recognized what I did in high school, it made it a little easier to just enjoy that time with my family and be grateful for the time I had with them since I knew it was coming to an end so quickly. But I definitely would say just be content where you are and look for the opportunities. And it is okay to be excited, but don't let that excitement for what's coming make you miss out on what's happening in the present.
That is so good. Thank you, Makaley, for sharing that. And I just know that it's going to speak directly into the lives of some people who are listening right now. And so I'm just so glad that you shared that with us. I'm so glad that you got to come on the Pinkfish podcast today. This has just been such a fun conversation and it's been so life-giving for me. And so just thank you for being here.
Of course, thank you for having me. I'm so excited for you and your podcast, and I feel honored to have been a guest.
Thank you for listening to the Pinkfish podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to give it a like, a thumbs up, subscribe, share, and all the things. I pray this episode has just met you right where you are and has encouraged you to draw closer to the Lord. Have a great rest of your day, friend.